How enjoyable is reading The Hobbit in 2025? Let's talk about it.
I'm Foulmouth. F you, motherfucker. Shit. Quack.
Howdy there, Marty here, and we're back in this video with a bit of a discussion on The Hobbit today. This video is probably going to be a little more unstructured, not really like a full-on review, but a little bit of a discussion on one of my favorite books of all time, The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. And yeah, I wanted to do a reread on this book, and yes, it is a reread for me, so that is something that you have to take into account for the discussion points on this video, I suppose. So this video is going to be a little bit of a light discussion, not like a super in-depth review, to be honest with you. Like, who the fuck am I to, like, do a full review on The Hobbit? You know, I mean, my feelings are valid, right? But at the same time, it's The Hobbit. Like, who am I? Who am I? And luckily, I don't really have to give, like, a super critical review anyhow, because I still really enjoyed this book, even if it did fall a little bit in favor for me personally on this go-around. But there are a few reasons for that, I think, and I do want to talk about them in this video. So let's do that now. And before we get too deep into the video, I do want to say I will talk about general spoilers. I don't know how much I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty of it, and I'm going to talk about the book kind of from the lens that you've already read it, to be perfectly honest with you, or that you're already familiar with the story. But I did want to get that warning out of the way. It would be unfair of me to spoil, like, one of the all-time classics, right? So how does this book stand up for me on this last read? In some ways, it's a little bit hard to identify why my experience was not quite what it once was with this book, but I do think there are a few reasons for it. When I picked this book up, I was actually in the process of getting a new job, which I got, so yay, new job, very excited about that. So I think I was a little bit mentally distracted when I picked this book up. Yeah, as a kid's book, I've always considered this to be a fairly easy read, and I remember specifically my reread of it in high school. I think I read it in like 3 or 4 days, maybe even 2 or 3 days, like with fairly casual reading. Like, it's a fairly light book and it's relatively easy to get through. This book actually almost put me in a reading slump, which is really weird to say that The Hobbit almost put me in a reading slump, because it's a relatively light book, it's a fairly easy book, it's a book I already knew I loved. I think I was just mentally in a different spot when I picked this up, so it didn't really serve the book. It wasn't fair to the book. Where I was, I think. So in part, I think that was a bit of a problem. And I think another odd reason for me not really enjoying this book quite as much on this go-around was, being totally honest, I did not like reading this copy of the book. I think it's a really nice edition, like on its own merits, but the physical reading experience of this book wasn't actually all that great, which left me a little bit sad, because I think it's a really charming edition. It has really great art throughout the whole book. It's a nice, like, cloth-bound book. But I didn't actually like reading the book all that much. Like, the actual physical merits of the book. And I think predominantly it's because it has these, like, super thick, glossy pages and they are very thick. It's almost like, sounds kind of lame, but it's almost like a chore to, like, get the page and turn them and making sure that you're only grabbing one page, because it constantly feels like you're getting 2 pages. Like, the text, the font on this is really great. And to be honest with you, this is probably still an edition I would recommend for, like, younger readers, because the super thick pages are going to stand up to, like, child hands. Like, you would really have to go out of your way to tear these pages up. They're also actually bound in there nicely. And yeah, the being glossy, they're going to be, like, resistant to, like, Cheeto hands, you know? So I think it's still, like, a really nice edition to get for kids. I think that kind of threw me off too. So between that and, like, the whole process of getting a new job, the book didn't pull me through like it had once done. But that might not actually be the novel's fault, like the writing's fault, right? Anyhow, moving on. I do want to talk predominantly about the things I still really love about this book, and the things that make this a worthwhile experience still in 2025. The first thing I think of, in all honesty, is it still has really fun characters. For 90 years later, or a book not written about 90 years ago, give or take, whatever it is exactly, Bilbo is still a very well-written character and very well realized. You really do get into his head super well, and you really feel like you're along with him for the journey emotionally. And so I think that's definitely to this book's credit. Gandalf is still really fun to read. Thorin, a few of the dwarves are pretty well written with what you get. Now, granted, there are, the 13 dwarf characters, so you don't get fully developed characters with most of them, but you do get some insight with them, and they're actually all a lot of fun to read for the most part. So that said, this book still has really fun characters and totally makes it worth reading in 2025 just based on that. The next thing I want to talk about is the pacing. The Hobbit is incredibly well paced. It's never boring. If you're bored reading The Hobbit, then I don't really know what to say, because this story starts up and just goes. Like chapter after chapter after chapter. Things are happening, and there's a lot of progress in the journey. Well, obviously, it's very suiting to a kid's book, but the pacing's incredible. You can't be bored reading The Hobbit. If you're bored reading The Hobbit, that's almost kind of on you, to be honest with you. Now, maybe it's just not to your taste in general, then that's fine. If you don't like it, that's fine, but you shouldn't be bored reading this book. There's stuff happening all the time. I think The Hobbit really shines when Bilbo is faced with confrontations with various antagonists. Like, for instance, the chapter Riddles in the Dark with Gollum, his interactions with Smaug. They're really good. They're really delicious. I love getting into Bilbo's head once again. Tolkien does an amazing job of making those scenes genuinely tense, and you do worry about the outcome. And furthermore, when there's conflict, like actual combat, it's really exciting. Like the fight with the spiders in Mirkwood is a super cool scene. The wolves, the wargs, I believe, what they're technically called in the book, with the scene with them in the trees, and Gandalf with like the fireballs or whatever it's happening. Like, that's all still really exciting. So I would say, in combination, like the pacing of the book itself with Bilbo's confrontations with the antagonists of the book, and the actual action scenes of the book are all really great. Totally making this a valid read in 2025. I do kind of want to shy away from deep criticism on this one, because for one, I don't think it really merits it, and most of the things I would kind of critique or would maybe imagine myself wanting a little bit differently from this book can pretty much be explained away by this being a kid's book for the most part, so you have to give it a certain amount of grace for that. There are some like logical things that I would struggle with normally, like it's very apparent at the end of the book that this whole journey is very poorly conceived and relies a whole lot on fate and maybe Deus Ex Machina, and some of that you can kind of explain away by Gandalf sort of engineering the whole thing, but I also think that's a little bit of like an easy excuse. There's kind of a throwaway line in the book. I forget exactly who says it. It might be Bilbo, whatever. It's not that important, but they sort of highlight the fact that in the end, they didn't really think too much of how they would actually deal with Smaug or what would happen with the treasure and all that. It was really just getting there. You would think they would have the foresight to really address some of the issues, like, well, what the hell are we going to do when we get there and there's a fucking dragon there? Like, right? They really don't have a plan, and part of me struggles a little bit with that, and everything just kind of works out in the end, right? Does that even compromise the enjoyment of the read? Not at all. Not really. Like, it's something in the back of my mind, but for one, I also kind of explain it away as like, yeah, it's a kid's book, whatever. Like, it's not that important. It's about the journey, right? But there is still a part of my, like, logical side that's like, bruh, like, what? Like, what? You didn't think of that? I think it's totally fair to give a certain amount of leeway for things that our adults are going to be hung up on, that kids aren't really going to give a crap about, right? So, is that a fair criticism? I don't know. In some ways, maybe. But at the same time, it's a criticism that is also irrelevant, right? So the book itself is still a lot of fun. To get to the heart of it, is this book still worth reading in 2025? Totally. It's a very charming book. It moves really well, has really great, really fun, almost literally timeless characters at this point. It's a completely valid read. I'm still really glad that I read it, and ultimately, I'd still probably put it amongst my top 10 favorite books of all time still. I still think it's a very, very valid read in 2025. Well, that's pretty much going to do it for this one. I sure hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, go ahead and hit that like button. If you'd like to see more videos from me, please hit that subscribe button. As I always say, it makes me feel like I accomplished something, but otherwise, I will see you in the next one. Bye.